What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our SEC football channel. It was another New Year's Six bowl win for the Florida Gators in 2019. Can they maybe take that next step in 2020? Maybe make it to the college football playoff? There are a lot of people that are giving them a shot for a number of different reasons. We're going to talk about the 5 biggest questions that the answer to these questions, I think, are going to determine their success. If the answer is positive, this team, I think, is definitely a playoff contender. But if things don't necessarily work out with these questions, I think it could be it should still be a really good year because our schedule's not that bad, but maybe not quite the college football playoff. So our first question, will the offensive line improve? That is by far the biggest question I have when I look at this team, when I look at this roster. The offensive line struggled last season, and it's got to get better. I mean, if they're going to compete against Georgia and Alabama, and they're going to beat the top teams in the SEC and in the country, the offensive line has got to be better because really everywhere else they're pretty solid. You lose Nick Buchanan. He started 13 games last year. Christopher Bleach is transferring out. So you got 2 offensive linemen that they have to replace. And they were very young on the offensive line last year. So they're going to be really leaning on some young players. They do have guys back, Stone Forsythe, Brett Hagee. They've got some players on that offensive line that I think are pretty talented. And again, they were pretty young last year, so I'm expecting them to improve. The question is, how much will they improve? I guess that really is the question I should have asked. How much will the offensive line improve? That's going to determine a lot about this offense. And also, can they find a run game? That's our next question, and it kind of goes back to the offensive line because I think the talent is there in the backfield. I think they have plenty of talent at running back. But the offensive line struggled a little bit to open up holes. I mean, their leading receiver was leading rusher was LaMichael Pirine. He only had 677 yards last season, averaged 5.2 yards per carry. That's not bad, but I'm sure a lot of that came against weaker opponents. Damian Pierce, Malik Davis, they need to step up. Malik Davis only averaged 2.5 yards per carry last season. You got Naquan Wright in there. So some guys on the roster, but maybe it's Lorenzo Lingard, the transfer from Miami, that will give them the boost that they need in that backfield. We'll see how much he can be a factor right away, but you got to get it going with the offensive line. It all starts there. The running backs need to, I'm sure, play a little bit better, but if the offensive line can block better, the running backs can find those holes, and they can have a guy maybe step up as that go-to running back, that'll go a long way for them. And we stick to the offense here. Who will emerge as their go-to wide receivers? They lost some really talented players off this team from last year. Their leading pass catcher in terms of receptions was actually Kyle Pitts, a tight end. He's kind of a hybrid, though. Will he play more at wide receiver or at tight end this year? That's a question, but they lose Van Jefferson, Freddie Swain, Josh Hammond, Tyree Cleveland. Major losses at wide receiver. Trayvon Grimes, I think, will be the number 1 receiver this season. He had 491 yards last year. I think he needs to take that next step and be the go-to guy, but we'll see if he's able to do that. You've got Jacob Copeland in there, Kadarius Toney, playmaker at wide receiver as well. And will Justin Shorter, will he have eligibility right away, the transfer from Penn State? That's a big question. I think he could give them a big boost. But who will emerge as that go-to wide receiver, or those 2 go-to wide receivers? They've got some guys to replace, so that'll be a question for this Florida team. And here's a big question. Can they beat Georgia? If you're going to make a run at the college football playoff, you're going to have to beat Georgia more than likely. You're going to have to beat Georgia to win the East. And obviously you got to win the East to get to the SEC championship, and then you got to probably win that to make it to the college football playoff. They have made strides. If you look at the talent, if you look at the way the teams have recruited, Georgia still has a talent advantage over Florida, but this is a veteran Florida team. This is maybe their year. If Kyle Trask can kind of do what he did last year and play a little bit better. Maybe this is the year they finally get over the hump. They beat Georgia. They win the SEC East. That's maybe the biggest question for Florida fans is, can they do it? They get LSU at home this year. I feel pretty good about that game. It's going to be tough, but they'll have a really good shot at home. But the big question will be, can they beat Georgia? That, to me, is clearly the biggest game on their schedule. And our final question is, will the schedule hurt them? Was just talking about the schedule. Let's say they don't beat Georgia, but they win out. They go 11-1, don't make the SEC championship. Most years, an SEC team going 11-1 is going to have a really good shot to make the college football playoff. Look at Alabama a couple of years ago. They went 11-1, didn't go to the SEC championship, made it. But this schedule, I think, could really hurt Florida. They have a very weak non-conference schedule. They do play LSU out of the West, so that'll give them a little bit of a boost. But when you look at that schedule, LSU, Georgia, that's really about it. There are no other big games. And if you lose one of those two big games, then I think it's going to be tough for the committee to put them in. I think they'll be in the conversation, and it obviously will depend on what happens with a lot of other teams. But that schedule ultimately could hurt them, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe they blow everyone else out, including LSU, and maybe they still get in. But that, to me, is going to be a big question. Will the schedule hurt them? And something else you might want to have happen is have Florida State be pretty good. That'll help the resume out as well. Let's say Florida State's a top 25 team, and maybe another team emerges like Kentucky out of the SEC East. All of a sudden, the resume could look a lot better. So, Florida fans, you need to really root for your opponents when they're not playing Florida to help boost that resume, because if they can't beat Georgia, which was that last question, they're going to have a really strong resume at 11-1 to make it into the college football playoff, in my opinion.